Now, retail sales flatlined in February after extremely wet weather put off shoppers from heading out to the high street. And while online spending performed well, shoppers ditched the high street instead for that. Now, this comes as we've seen inflation fall to 3.4% this week, and interest rates are on their way to cuts, says the Bank of England governor. So the big question is, are we creeping slowly out of recession? Well, GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan joins me now to tell us more. Liam, we were having such a good news week. Inflation was down, the tantalising prospect of interest rate cuts, and now retail, flat as a pancake.
It is, Martin. That's often the case in February, particularly when the weather's bad. Look, there is a silver lining to this cloud, if you like, the cloud of flatlining retail sales. And it's a silver lining if you are a mortgage holder or you've got lots of personal debt. The fact that retail sales are flat means that the Bank of England will be less worried about consumer spending juicing up the economy and causing inflation. So it makes them slightly more likely to lower rates, sooner rather than later. Look, we've had so much economic data this week. It's worth you and I just taking stock as we go into the weekend. We had that inflation number, didn't we, on Wednesday, when inflation fell from 4% during the year to January to 3.4% during the year to February. That's a very chunky reduction in inflation. Of course, prices are still going up, but they're going up by less. And within that inflation number, some prices are actually going down, at least on an annual basis. If you look at petrol and diesel, petrol during February 2024, Martin, was about 4% cheaper than in February 2023, and diesel was about 11% cheaper. Though in the last couple of weeks, both petrol and diesel prices have started to tick up again. They are still lower than they were February last year. So we've had that low inflation number, but then the Bank of England did hold interest rates yesterday at 5.25%. That's a 16-year high. They've been at 5.25% since last August. And the fact that retail sales are flat means that the Bank of England now is more likely to lower interest rates sooner. But I still don't think they're going to lower interest rates till June at the earliest. I thought it would have been earlier. But when I saw that the MPC voted yesterday 8-1 to keep rates on hold, that's real stuck in the mud. Over cautiousness. I thought it'd be 6-3 or even 5-4 to hold rates. So on a knife edge, just one person would have to switch for the next monthly meeting, or their most months, to actually recommend and implement an interest rate cut. But it's not to be. The Bank of England has been very, very cautious. They were slow to spot inflation coming in 2021, very, very slow. And now they want to prove how tough they are on inflation by being too slow to actually lower rates, imposing more economic damage on the economy than needs be. But, you know, it won't surprise you to hear me say that, Martin. I've been maybe suggesting politely that the Bank of England has been making the wrong decisions for some time.
Liam, I always like to pick your brains on a positive and instructive note, and we're seeing a downward grind on high street. So many people watching the show will see their local high street withering away, and this migration into online shopping seems to be a one-way street, Liam. What can be done? What would you do? What should we do to help the beleaguered high street? We're coming for a general election. There's a lot of votes in this, surely.
It's a great question, Martin. And, you know, when we set up GB News back in 2021, the future of the high street was along with small businesses, these were major themes that we wanted to tackle. So what I would do to revitalise high streets is I would have a complete change of the regime of what we call business rates. Business rates are taxes that businesses have to pay before they've taken in any money at all, let alone made any profit. So even if you make a loss, even if you have no revenue, you still must pay these taxes. And they're taxes on the rateable value of your premises. Whether you rent the premises or whether you own the premises, you have to pay a tax that reflects the value of that premises on top of your rent, if you pay rent. And business rates raise a lot of money. They raise about £30 billion a year. So the government, the incoming Labour government, the surviving Tory government, whatever it is, would have to be careful how it reformed business rates. But it can't be right. It cannot be right that bricks and mortar companies have to pay this tax through the nose, whereas online companies don't have to pay this tax. All right, they pay the tax on their warehouses, but it's nothing compared to the tax that a retail unit would pay. And it's really those business rates which are hammering high streets because they're just making a lot of shops unviable. That plus if I was Rishi Sunak, I would make it my business. I'd make it one of my missions in life to make sure that people can park in towns. So get rid of all these horrible parking apps that particularly the elderly can't use, people without smartphones, 50p or a pound coin, in a meter to park or whatever it is. Not these, or even a bank card that you can tap. These parking apps. I mean, I know from my own market town where I live, the amount of particularly older people who complain about parking apps, it makes it really, that's also hollowing out the high street. So I think it's a combination of clamping down on business rates, which have got out of control, maybe some kind of levy on the online retailing giants to replace that business tax. Because a lot of them don't pay much tax in the UK. They've structured their massive companies and lobbied governments. And by the way, employed loads of government advisors as they come out of government in a kind of, inverse. Well, I won't say the word, but it certainly looks a bit unsavory that so many government advisors get jobs with the big tech giants when they leave government. And yet when they're in government, they somehow don't manage to get around to regulating them in a way that even people who like free markets like you and me would recognize they need to be regulated given their enormous market power. So I do think we need to help revitalize our high streets. I do think it's about incentives helping physical bricks and mortar shops, incentives to tax online shops in order to help physical bricks and mortar shops, because our high streets, they're not just places where you go to buy your shopping. They're places where you meet and greet, where communities look after and look out for each other. That's the case in many of our in our cities and particularly our towns where most people live. It's a part of policy which I think the Tories have completely underperformed. Labour talk a good game about the high street. We'll see what happens, because you and I know, Martin, these are the kind of things that really, really matter to GB News viewers and listeners. This sense of place, this sense of local community. It's what makes people happy. It's what makes our country coherent. And it strikes me that our taxation policies in recent years have done very little in order to strengthen our lovely, vital high streets. And they've done a lot to weaken them.
Liam Halligan, I say it every time, I say it every week, but if we have people like you in charge, we'd have a fighting chance. My friend, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you. Now, a children's hospital in Manchester is under fire after allegations staff treated a child poorly because he was Jewish. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.